We were talking about your career at Booth Lockard
and the
Well,
important aspects of it.
yeah, one of the things that helped me was when I joined the firm, Psych Writer had come there, and I don't know how long he'd been there, but Psych Writer wanted to be a personal injury lawyer. That's what he was going to do, and do a lot. Of course, that's what the firm did. Was he started taking divorces, and his clients must have been really impressed with him, and all in one Psych was just buried in divorce work, and Psych Writer used to keep up with those fees, you know, and that he was doing, and so it ended up he just didn't hardly do. I remember him doing one big personal injury case. He asked me to come try it with him. He did most of the trial, but that's the only personal injury case I remember him doing.
Was that the A&P case?
I don't know. It was a case in federal court. No, it was we had an expert, accident reconstruction expert. I can't remember who it was. That wasn't A&P though. Did you know about Psych being in a?
Yeah, it was an A&P case that he tried against Gordon Roundtree.
No, I don't know about that.
Okay.
That could have been before I got there. I'm not sure.
It was after, because I was here. I was at Cook Yancey at that time.
Yeah.
Cook Clark at that time.
Well, the lawyers up there used to say that Psych Writer's a salad lawyer and Troy's a dessert lawyer. So Psych Writer likes to get his salad and eat it and then do the work. And Troy likes to do all the work and get his at the end as a dessert. And so I ended up, let's see, Whitfield and Politz and myself and Jim Boland were doing most of the PI work. But I ended up doing a greater percentage of the PI work. I'm not sure why that was. When I came along, I think Jim had just been there a year, and I jumped right in and started doing jury trials. And so that worked out real well for me. The breakup came, and I'm the one that started the ball rolling.
You came in 1970, is that when
Came in 1970.
And when did you leave?
February of 79. I came there in February of 70 and left in February of 79. Hank and I worked in the Jimmy Carter campaign, and Hank wanted to be considered to be a federal judge, and Carter set up a system where they really looked at the merits of the appointments and had recommendations, had a committee. And the first committee that they had 2 openings, and they came up with 3 potential nominees. One was Judge Rubin, the guy that was on the Supreme Court that was from Ville Platte,
Judge Tate,
and Hank. Well, Rubin and Tate got it. It was sometime after 1976. But it was perfectly obvious to me another opening was coming up, and Hank was the only one left. And I knew that Hank was going to get that Fifth Circuit job. And I knew it was going to be sometime during 1979. I can't remember how I knew that. Also, I wanted to do nothing but personal injury work. And the firm, especially Hank, had this feeling that we ought to take every case that walks in that door. We ought to. If they come to see us, we ought to represent them. And I was just sick of divorce work.
You were doing divorce work?
A little bit of it.
Were you doing any criminal work?
No.
Some of the other people did criminal work, though, didn't they?
Yes. I'm not, what I'm fixing to say, is not anything all bad about criminal law. If you're going to try criminal cases, you've got to quote a fee and get it right now, or you'll never get paid. That's just the way it is. And it's got to be a big fee. And if people come in and they don't have the money, I've seen them go mortgage their house, put a second mortgage on their house, and just all kind of financial strain. And I just wasn't very good at that. I like criminal law. I tried several cases that I was appointed to, and I liked it, but I just didn't have that ability. And so I just didn't do it. But in any event, I thought that the firm was not going to do well after Hank left. And I didn't want to do general practice. I was tired of that. I couldn't stand divorce work. I'd had some very unpleasant experiences, and I won't go through them because of naming clients and it'd take too long. But I decided to leave. Well, when I decided to leave, Sockrider and Boland and Jack decided to leave. You never knew why Whit did what he did. He was very nervous about it. He'd handwrite a letter and send it all to us one day saying he was going to quit, and then we'd get another one a couple of days later and say he wasn't, and back and forth. But finally he did. And so...
He was not young at that time. He was...
Oh, no, he was... I don't know that he practiced after that. I don't know what he did. To my knowledge, he didn't go somewhere to a law office. But Sockrider and Boland and I, so that left 4. And of course, Mr. Harry was dead. Leonard Lockard. And by that time, Jim Reeder had left, and Fred Sutherland had joined the firm. And then Joe and Sock and Pleasant and the 2 Politz boys were there. And then Hank went on the bench. That's 4. And then John Pleasant and Fred left in September. And that left it down to Joe and the 2 Politz boys. So he went to pieces, and I think Judge Pleasant in particular was not particularly happy that I started the ball rolling. I don't know how the rest of them felt about it, but
Was Hank the person that kind of kept all those divergent personalities together, or was it something other than that?
That's why I thought the firm would not survive Hank leaving it. I had no idea. I would never. First of all, I didn't think Sockrider and Boland would leave. But you know, people would come to my office after I announced I was leaving and ask me why, and I'd explain to them that when Hank leaves, you know, I mean, Sockrider and Boland knew how the dynamics of the law firm. They knew how it worked. And so they decided to leave too. And Whit left, I think, primarily because he just more or less decided to retire. And I think he was concerned about what was going to happen with the firm and what his financial obligations might be and that sort of thing. But, yeah, that was...
All right, did you go to Austin Street then? Is that where you went?
Yeah. I just thought of I had a note on the other case I had, though.
Okay.
That was of some moment. There was a couple named Beverly and Mimi Head, and they had a son that went to Tulane, and he joined Deke. And the day he got initiated in the spring, I suppose, of his freshman year, there was a young man who'd been on a hunting trip who had also been rushed by Deke but hadn't gotten an invitation to join Deke. And his father was the owner of a big bank in New Orleans and was from Crowley. I can't remember his name, but this case is most unusual. The boy claimed, well, the head boy, Bev and Mimi's son, was leaving the initiation and walking down the street as he was unloading his car. And he claimed that he was unloading his rifle when it went off, and a bullet went and hit the street and ricocheted up and hit the head boy right behind the ear and killed him, right on the scene. I'm convinced to this day that the kid thought the gun was empty. I don't believe he shot him on purpose. He was a nice kid. You know, I deposed him. I had him at the trial. He just wasn't the kind. But I think he thought that gun was unloaded, and he put that scope on that kid and pulled that trigger. The reason I think that, and I pretty well had it confirmed, was that the bullet made a hole, and it left a hole where it went in, and it was perfectly about 200 degrees, a perfect circle. And the coroner told me, we knew what kind of bullet it was, that if that bullet had hit the sidewalk, it would never, no way it could have possibly maintained its shape. But we tried that before a jury. It was pretty interesting. The
State court?
Federal court in New Orleans.
How'd you get jurisdiction?
It happened in New Orleans. It happened in
No, but
Tulane.
how'd you get federal jurisdiction?
They were from Alabama.
Okay.
University of Virginia. It was George Strickler's case, who's a professor at Tulane. The defendant,
The heads were from Alabama.
they were from Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay.
Yes. Matter of fact, Mimi was an Iranian. Her father had been Minister of Education under the
The Shah?
Shah, and her mother was the first woman from Iran that ever got a PhD, so she came from a pretty highfalutin family herself. But the defense for the boy brought in Remington. It was a Remington rifle as a third-party defendant, claiming it was defective. And he got him an expert to say it was defective.
Who was defending the case? What?
I can't remember his name. This is just a story about lawyers, though. So he third-partied him. So Remington's lawyer came in. Well, I was left with this is the 1970s something, and I think we still had solidary obligations. We did have solidary obligations.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to name Remington, but I had to. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't take the chance. But I got up and told the jury in opening statement why I had named Remington, and that Remington was going to put in the expert. But the hardest thing I had, Remington's lawyer, I told him, look, I'm not going after you in any way. I'm going to leave you alone, but I've got to keep you in the case. I want you not to move for a directed verdict in favor of Remington until the defendant has put on the Remington experts. Because if you do, I'm going to lose you, and I'm going to have to put on the Remington experts. But I'm not coming after you. Well, that lawyer, he had the hardest time conceiving of the good strategy of letting me go ahead, because not me putting on them, because once I put them on, I was in a position to where I pretty much had to go after them. And I finally talked him into it. It scared him to death. And, of course, he couldn't move for a directed verdict after they did the put on their experts, although I thought they were totally unconvincing. But I got up in closing statement and said, I don't want a judgment against Remington. I don't believe that what they proved this gun was defective. Not a thing in the world. And, and the defense lawyer said he knew that when I said that he wasn't getting a judgment against Remington. But it was strange. Those two defense lawyers, I really had to work on that Remington lawyer to get him to go along with the strategy. Now, he was quite pleased with the way it came out after I made my closing statement, but otherwise it was difficult. But in any event, that was a case. And one of the most amazing things is at some point the Fifth Circuit started reversing the amount of judgments. And the highest judgment I could find anywhere, if I remember correctly, was $200,000 per parent. And this is the luckiest thing. This is pure luck. I told George and I told the client that when I closed, I wanted to ask for a certain amount of money because I thought the highest that we could hold would be $225,000. So I got up and made my statement, and I asked for a certain amount of money. I forget what I asked for. It was over $225,000. And the jury came back with $225,000. And George and the clients thought I had woven some sort of magic, but it was just dumb luck, what they came back with. I found out later that there were a couple of people on the jury. The heads were obviously wealthy, obviously wealthy, and the defense lawyer sort of made some references to that. He suggested that instead of awarding him money, that they award money to set up a tennis tournament at Tulane in his honor and his name to perpetuate his name. That didn't work either. But
was he a tennis player?
Nah. He just I don't know where he came up with that.
Nutty.
But in any event, that case was pretty remarkable. But
tell us about your career after you left Booth Lockard in '79. Still going on?
Well, no, I finished my last case in September. I had it against your partner Sidney Cook, and I finished it. Well, there are a couple of cases in there. I had that tells you something about lawyers. I had my client was in this case. Gosh, I can't think of the client's name right now. I ended up with a $6.2 million judgment. Judge Cunningham awarded me $6.2 million. Sonny Thomas had advised after we started the jury trial, we had Jack Britton Sr. in there defending one of the automobiles.
This was an intersectional collision in Natchitoches, is that right?
Right. My client was going down the so-called bypass, and the other car was coming Highway 7 from Manny and hit my client's car and killed the guest passenger and caused my client permanent brain damage. He never really got out of bed again. But one of the things that was remarkable about that case was that I had another lawyer, I'm not going to name him, that was representing the person who was deceased in the car. And we divided up the witnesses to interview. There were a lot of people that had seen that this light had, the light for the bypass, something had hit it and turned it. Most people said there were two lights there. Most people said there was a green light and a red light. And that's what the police report said. And a lot of people said that. And I got the idea during the trial preparation that he told me all the witnesses he talked to wouldn't be helpful. And I was a little uneasy with that. So I had them subpoenaed, and so I had them come to the law office where I was operating out of. And at lunch on the first day...
Were you working with Sonny Thomas?
No. No. I was associated in the case with a lawyer out of Houston. The family had been in Houston doing rehabilitation. Charlie Whitesides? Whitehead had that case. The guy worked for the Ford dealership, which Charlie's family owned. Is Charlie still practicing?
Not really.
I don't know. Charlie had the case, and the guy was insured. His health insurance was through the Ford agency, and they canceled the insurance. And it was okay for the husband because he was covered by workman's comp, and Liberty Mutual was paying all the bills, but it left the wife and two children without any insurance. And that wasn't a very good thing to do. So I got that case from a lawyer from Houston. But in any event, my lawyer who was representing the other person in the car, as I was saying, is supposed to talk to everybody, but I had him come down. So I had a guy come in, and his name was Buddy something. He had a PhD in physical education, and he'd been at Northwestern forever.
Buddy Bonnet.
Buddy Bonnet.
He was my high school basketball coach for a year. Great guy.
Well, as you can tell, Buddy Bonnet there was nothing unbelievable or anything else about Buddy Bonnet, and everybody knew Buddy.
He was from Natchitoches.
Bonnet.
That's where he went to. He played basketball at Northwestern, and he was a handsome guy.
I didn't know anything about him except he'd been at Northwestern for a long time, and everybody in town knew him. So I got him in there and said, "Tell me what you know about the case." He said, "Well, the night before, I was going home. It was real late. I was coming down the bypass, and I had a red light. I had two red lights. No. Let's see if I got this right. Right. I had two red lights. He said, all at once my light turned green, and the traffic on Highway 7 started moving. And he said, so I got down to the intersection, and I looked up, and they had a green light, and I had two green lights. And I said, two green lights? And he said, two green lights. And I said, wow. You stay around. So I guess that's part of why I'm obsessive compulsive. If you want it done right, do it yourself. And that was, I don't know what would have happened in that case, except for Buddy Bonnet. I'm glad you knew Buddy, and then you can appreciate what I'm talking about.
I've never heard that before. That's amazing. He was a great guy. Well, he was a great basketball coach. He went to LSU and was an assistant basketball coach at LSU when Ellis Cooper left Spring Hill and signed with LSU to play. And he was an assistant under Jay McCrary for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And then he went to Northwestern and he taught physical education. Got his PhD, I think.
Well, I think you'll agree with that. You can go out on the street and you can stop 100 guys and you can talk to them long enough to get a feel of how they feel to a jury, and you might find somebody that would equal Buddy, but you wouldn't find anybody any better. And when I realized how close I'd come to losing him, gives me shivers, but in any event. But that case really helped me because although I'd made some pretty good money at Booth Lockard, you know, I save all my money, and at that time you could put a huge amount of money in a retirement system. You know, they got it down now to about $25,000-$30,000 a year. But so I put almost all that fee, what was left after the government took their share, and gave me a whole lot of security, which I managed to keep ever since.
Were you, when you were on Austin Place, were you and Henry Walker in the same office, or were y'all in the same building? I don't remember.
No, we were in different buildings. Henry wanted me to come into his building. I was good friends with Henry, and he's my friend until today. But that atmosphere in that office, I would have been in kind of an area, which was his dining room, but didn't have any doors. And I just, well, Henry, this is no secret. He has a tendency to spend money, and I don't. But I rented Steve Ramsey owned the building next door, and I rented an apartment there from him, and stayed there 2 or 3 years.
And then did you move over there to Irving Place?
Right, moved to Irving Place,
Let me ask you about your recollections of judges that were significant in your career that you thought were of noteworthy.
You're speaking of good judges.
Well, I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. We know Judge Dawkins was a very good judge. Judge Dawkins was never anything but a complete gentleman to me. Wasn't to you one time.
Well, he wasn't.
But he was a gentleman.
He wasn't ungentlemanly. He just was bizarre on that case.
And I really enjoyed practicing for Judge Dawkins. I went to federal court quite a lot after that. Who succeeded Judge Dawkins?
Judge Stagg.
Judge Stagg. Well, after that, and I liked Tom Stagg. I was a fraternity brother with Don Walters, but something kind of changed. It just wasn't a pleasant place for lawyers, in a sense, to me. I don't know if that was me or what, and I went over there several times, but I just began to try to avoid it. John Dixon was an excellent judge. He could have an unpleasant personality occasionally, but I admired Judge Dixon a lot. I'm trying to think. Judge Hardy, who was on the Court of Appeals when I came up here, was a real good judge. I remember Judge Boland, Jim Boland, on the Court of Appeals. Was one thing that was real funny about Boland, he had quite a wit. One day I argued a case against Jim Thornton, and I quoted a part of the record, and I had it in just a single sheet of paper. I didn't have the whole record. I just had a single sheet of paper. And Jim, in his own way, got carried away, and and I guess I was the appellant, and got carried away and said he'd eat that record if it was in the record. naturally, on rebuttal, I got up and called the court's attention to the book, the page and everything, and read it and finished up. And that was up. Did you ever practice up in the Court of Appeals? Well, when you got through, everybody had to pack up and get out because you couldn't get out the back. So we were packing up to get out, and Judge Boland said, Mr. Thornton, would you like that record with ketchup or with salt and pepper? And I'm not, I don't want to leave anybody out, but of note, Judge Brunn has been a good judge. I think Judge Creighton is going to do good on the Supreme Court. I've just practiced mostly before the civil judges, and but when I started practicing, Judge Turner liked to be gone by noon. He went down to the Elks Club and had lunch and played whatever he played during the afternoon. And they had up a system set up so that it was virtually impossible. It was almost impossible to get a trial dates. Do you remember that?
Between the judges and Bill Price, it was hard.
Well, Bill Price
was, I'm sure he was told to do.
Oh, he told exactly what to do. And you set a case on Wednesday for the following week.
Right.
And that's a deterrent. The way it's set up now, it takes so long between the time you ask for a trial and get the pre-trial order. I think that's a little long and kind of drags them out. And then if you get kicked off, you got to wait too long. But that business of having to be ready, but not knowing whether your case would be set, but having to be ready on a Wednesday to go to trial Monday, that was tough. Did you find it that way?
I always filed a 10-day letter, so at least I had 10 days instead of. But most people that I encountered, we would agree to a date, sometime in advance, 2 or 3 months or so in advance, and then agreed that we would drop a slip so it would be set. And so.
But that didn't mean he was going to be set.
No, not well. So people would go over there to make sure Bill Price didn't put the quietus on you,
Well, I got to where I went over there and I took the slip you dropped and had Bill go over it before I dropped it.
Well, that was smart.
Maybe I wrote Troy and I put the B, then wiggled it or something.
Yeah.
So Judge Dixon during those days did good, but the other 3 judges were all right, but they weren't. They just weren't hard working and so forth. And to my way of thinking, made a lot of mistakes, legal mistakes. But
how about your community activities? What? I know that you were involved in politics a lot.
Yeah, I was an active member of First Methodist Church for a number of years, but then hadn't been active in a whole lot of years. I was on the board there. Mostly I was active in the Louisiana Trial Lawyers Association and the Bar Association. And I used to be in the House of Delegates, and I was on the legislative committee that reviewed legislation, and got to be good friends with some people on there. Jack Weiner, who's on the Court of Appeals, was on there. What's the lawyer that just ruled that the ban on marriage, gay marriages?
Judge Feldman?
Yeah, Marty Feldman was on there. I never will forget him. He used the word cockamamie all the time. That's a cockamamie law. And quite a few people. And finally they shut that down, and I lost interest in that. But mostly I've been involved in politics has been my hobby.
You were president of the trial lawyers, correct?
President of the trial lawyers.
And you were real active in lobbying for the trial lawyers.
Yes.
Maybe that's not, maybe you can't say lobbying, but you were.
Oh, I was lobbying.
You were lobbying? Okay.
Yeah. I was very fortunate in that Carl Barbier, who's now a district judge, federal district judge in New Orleans.
He's the BP judge.
Right. It was his hobby too. He came up there every year and was there Monday through Thursday. And during the 1996 tort reform session, I went down there, and I didn't stay all the time, but I realized Carl was down there, so just on my own, didn't make any money out of it. I'd get up at 4 a.m. on Monday morning, be gone by 5, and I'd be in Baton Rouge in time for civil law to meet at 9 or 9:30. And then I'd leave sometimes Wednesday afternoon and sometimes Thursday at noon. And I did that in the odd number of years. I did it for 5 years. Just having fun. Rented me an apartment down there, and I really enjoyed that. And I to this day, I supported 3 of the people running for the school board this time, and gave them pretty good contributions. So that's been most of my.
You ran for office at one
Yes, I
occasion.
ran for Congress, and right after Buddy Romer got elected governor. If you can find anybody that voted for me, you can find a rare individual. There must be something wrong with them. But I obtained a reputation for being a big liberal. It's because of one thing I know is my support of blacks and equal rights for blacks. And I've got a lot of friends who are blacks. I don't really see that as being liberal, but that's what most people see. And I also spoke for the Equal Rights Amendment for women. As a matter of fact, I spoke before the House Civil Law Committee one year, 1977. They decided to go with an all-male crowd. It was me and Alphonse Jackson and some poor retired Yale law professor. Of course, I think the vote was 12-0 against us. But Keel picked it up and ran what I had to say. And I had the funniest reaction from that. Now, I was amazed. Most of the males at the courthouse thought they liked what I did. They really did. Several doctors and other people of some money didn't like it particularly. And I think the doctors and the more wealthy people didn't see that their wife ought to necessarily be equal or what. But most of the males at the courthouse, their wives had to work too, and they were being underpaid. Mm-hmm. And they were hot about it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So, but strangely enough, philosophically, I'm very much a libertarian. What I see in government just drives me crazy, the way they waste money and all the stuff they do. On the other hand, I come from a populist background, and I've got this looking out for the little man theory, which I guess is what brings me over to being on the liberal side.
I asked you about judges. What lawyers do you think were noteworthy, or people that are memorable that you encountered in your career?
Well,
both plaintiff, defendant, criminal, whatever.
Charlie Meyer was one of the best lawyers I've ever seen. Sidney Cook was a great lawyer. There were a lot of good ones. Of course, Hank Politz was all those people up at Booth Lockard. There were like John Pleasant was a good lawyer, but he did succession work all the time. He didn't get involved in a lot of the more complicated or trial work. I consider trial work to be very difficult. Sometimes I wish I'd had a succession practice, but I'd have probably gone crazy doing it. But there got to be others. Caldwell Roberts is a real good lawyer. Charlie Meyer did something one time. Charles Petrus was, have you heard this story, was trying a case about New York Furniture Company's roof.
Bewley Furniture Company.
Bewley?
Frank Cook was involved in that case, I believe.
Charles had an expert, and he'd been asked in interrogatories whether or not he had an expert and stuff like that. And I can't remember the exact facts, but Bucky Schober, he put his expert up there and he got up and objected to him. And Judge Middleton ruled that his expert couldn't testify. Have you heard this story?
Mm-mm.
I probably wouldn't be telling it except Charles now. You know, his condition.
Mm-hmm.
And so Charlie was one of the defense lawyers. And Charlie got Petrus over to the side and said, tell the judge you want 30 minutes. You're going to go over and prepare a writ to the Second Circuit. And they give you 30 minutes or something at a time. So Charles goes over to his office and does whatever is necessary to change the, make a writ application. Well, when they came back, Judge Middleton had decided to reverse himself.
Why did he exclude him to begin with?
I don't know. But somebody told Charles Petrus that Charlie Meyer spent a pretty good bit of time in there with Middleton while he was gone. And I'm sure, and as I understood the story later, Charlie said, look, we all knew about the expert. We all knew everything about him. This isn't the way it ought to go.
Yeah.
That's what I was told. And I never heard another story like that about lawyers. I sometimes wonder what I would have done. I don't know that I've made the objection, but I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah, I don't know either. Wow, that is tells you a lot about Charlie Meyer.
Yeah. Of course, there are a lot of good lawyers in the trial, and I'm not trying to leave out people in Shreveport. I'm just not. I'm having a hard time thinking. I mean, like Sockrider's a great divorce lawyer. More power to him as far as I'm concerned.
One case that you haven't talked about, wasn't Spiller's your case?
Correct.
That was a big case, an important case.
Well, that case was in the line of if the jury makes an award, you don't reverse it. But
it was also an important products case, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Right. It was an important products case. But the interesting thing about it was Jesse McDonald was representing, I think it was Goodrich, that mounted the Spillers bought a lumber truck to haul lumber, and they put an extra axle on it. I think they call it a third wheel or something like that. Mm-hmm. But they didn't put any rims or tires on it. You could drive the truck, but if you wanted to do anything with the trailer, you were going to have, no, I'm sorry. They supplied the rims, but not the tires. You were going to have to buy tires for it. So Spillers goes over, it was Montgomery Ward, that's who it was. And the people who made it, G&S Manufacturing Company up in Arkansas, that prepared this truck, went out to an old dump and got some old tires that were all rusted to pieces and wire brushed them and painted them black and put them on this truck. And those were locking rim tires, which meant that when you put them on, you turn the rims and they locked. But if they all rusted off, that lock was subject to blowing. And they, while they were putting the tires on, they were rolling one over to put it on the truck, and it blew up. And it just so happens that half of the wheel came and hit Spillers in the leg and almost knocked it off. But Jesse McDonald was defending it. Did you ever try a case against Jesse?
No.
Jesse, he asked more questions than anybody I've ever seen. And I was sitting next to the jury. And Jesse had an expert from Sun City, Arizona. I never will forget him. Excellent, well-qualified expert. Why Jesse had him? Because his part of the case was so simple. He should have been leaning on G&S Manufacturing Company, all their fault. And he was leaning on the G&S. All of his witnesses, it was like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. They said, what did the rim look like? It was bright and shiny and painted. Bright and shiny and painted. Bright and shiny and painted. But anyway, he put on his expert. And he had a booklet there where he had all the questions and all the answers written out. And he was walking around with it on a clipboard, walking in front of the jury. And the jury could see that not only were the questions on there, but also the answers. But they could also see it was about that thick. So it got to be about, he started with his witness. It took him forever to qualify. And he got to be about 5 till 12, and the judge said, maybe this is a good part to break, Mr. McDonald. Well, Jesse thought, for some reason, that would be a real bad idea to break in the middle. So he has to keep on going. Well, he went on and on and on. And one of the jurors, while Jesse was up near the witness, asking him some kind of question, turned to the other ones and says, what has he got left? And the guy said, a goddamn book. Well, and the jury awarded me the exact amount I asked for. So yeah, that was one of the things about that Sonny Thomas taught me early on. You might have a case that if you evaluate it on paper using the medical and so forth, and you got a poor witness for a plaintiff, is worth one thing. Another guy that's real smart and so forth is great. Well, Don Spillers, my woman that lived 2 doors from me, in Shreveport, went to high school with him, and she said he was simply brilliant. And he was really, really smart. And when they started cross-examining him, he cut John Madison to pieces. Madison quit. Well, then Jesse takes him on. He just slaughtered Jesse. He hadn't earned a penny on his taxes the year before the accident. And of course, I never will forget, somehow Jesse's the one that got to ask him this question. He says, well, how about the fact you didn't make any money?
He didn't report any money?
He didn't report any income.
Did he file a tax return?
Oh yeah, he filed a tax return. And Spiller said, well, let me tell you about that. He said, starting in December of the year before, I built a house. And so forth. And that house, it took me all year to build that house. It cost me $25,000 to build that house, and when I got through, it was worth $60,000. And I mean, it was just like that all the way. And he just ripped them up. It was, and I had advised him that if we could, at that time, $25,000 would have been a good award in that case. And I'd advised him if they got to that amount of money, and they got pretty close to it. And I told him he ought to consider it. And he wouldn't consider it at all. And walking out, he put his arm around me and said, see, you're a better lawyer than you thought you were. I said, yeah. I said, I was lucky. But by the same token, my clients had always, when the check came in, they'd endorse it. I'd put it in my trust account. And when the money came in, I'd split it. And so I explained this to Don. He said, well, let me ask you this. He said, how would you feel about we go over to the bank and open an account and put this check in it so that when it comes back paid, you and I both can come over here and we'll both have to sign a check and take it out. He said, I just feel better about it that way. And I said, you're the boss. I'd never had a client do that before. But old Donald Spillers, he was always thinking. Yeah. And I don't think it was that he mistrusted me. He just wanted to be sure.
Thought that was a better way of doing business. Tell us just about your present day activities. What you do for fun.
Oh, I just mostly read. I did play golf, but golf bores me to death, and I've got to get back into something though. Retiring is difficult. It's very, very difficult. But I don't know how this is going to work out. I'm not entirely happy with it.
Do you have an office?
It's in my home.
Mm-hmm.
I had shared office with Henry and Laurie, but I think it was 1977. 2007. They decided to retire, and so I didn't have any place to go. So I just went home. And I'll tell you about one other case though that was kind of funny. Funny thing happened. Let's see. Yeah, I was by myself then. Sonny Thomas's daughter, Marcia Thomas Pendleton.
You might tell them if they don't know who Sonny Thomas is, who he is.
Speaking of good lawyers,
that'd be the one at the top of my list.
Speaking of good lawyers, he's one of the best I've ever seen. Did you ever see him in the courtroom?
Yeah, I tried cases against him and with him.
It was just marvelous.
It looked so easy, but he tells me it was not. It was so hard. And when he quit, he wouldn't even step foot in the courthouse. He didn't want any part of it.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about him. I was down in Third Circuit one day, and he was arguing a case against Bill
Cruz.
Cruz.
You told me this, but
it's
a good story though. Tell it.
Well, Sonny got up and made the worst. He was the appellate. Made the worst opening argument I have ever heard in my life. It was muddled. It was just unbelievable. I thought, what in the wide world is he doing? I could not believe it. So Cruz gets up and he's arguing. And the judge, and he's arguing a certain line of cases. And he said, well, the judge said, Mr. Cruz, you know, in case of such and such and such and such, we reverse that. It was handed down recently. Well, Sonny had a advance sheet in his hand. Sonny takes the advance sheet and tears out the case and goes up to the lectern and hands it to Bill and says, here, Bill, here's the case. Oh, God. Well, Bill looks at the case and it says, "You're a dead loser." And then Sonny got up and made the best closing argument I have ever heard. He said, I guess it had to do with penalties and attorney's fees. He said, the first thing that goes is the car. Next thing it goes is the refrigerator. Next thing it goes is the heater. The next thing it goes is the living room furniture. And I guess his opening statement was just a waylay crew. Gosh, he was a good lawyer. He's the one that when I was in the middle of trying the Natchitoches bypass case, we were picking a jury, and he represented the plaintiff in the other car, and that hit my client's car, and Jack Britton was representing the insurance. We'd sued them too on the car that hit them. And Jack was in front of that jury. I mean, it scared me to death. He was up there saying, let me ask you folks, do y'all know what a red light means? Do y'all know that a red light means stop? Everybody said yes. Do you know what a green light means? Do you know that a green light means you're supposed to go? Everybody said yes. Do you know that if you see a red light, you're not supposed to go through it? Yes. Because his client had the green light, and it just scared me to death. And I went over at lunch, and I was talking to Sonny about it, and Sonny wasn't even coming over there. He's going to come over. He's going to let me present the evidence on liability, and then he's going to come over and put on his client and the doctors and so forth. Sonny said, well, he said, why don't you just go over there and tell everybody and Judge Cunningham that you'd just as soon have a bench trial instead of a jury. I said, well, coming from Sonny Thomas, you don't question it, but this was a big case. And I said, gosh, Sonny, Natchitoches juries have a great reputation for plaintiffs. I mean, and I picked some people, and it's looking pretty good. He said, well, yeah, do what you want to. He said, but if I were you, I'd go over there and just try this before Peyton. Well, I wasn't going to argue with that. So I went over and did it, and everybody agreed to it. Wow. So that was a big boost. But his daughter got breast cancer, and doctor in Natchitoches went in to biopsy it, came out with a negative biopsy. And then, I can't remember his name, and then she came up here and saw Dr. Barrett, and he treated her for long, and they did everything imaginable over a period of time and didn't find anything. And finally she went down to Ochsner's, and gosh, they found it, they just missed the tumor. And by that time it was in her liver, and it was in everything imaginable. And a real tragic case. You can't believe how close she and Sonny were. Marcia was kind of a tomboy, and Sonny's got a bunch of kids, and he seems to be close to all of them, but I just got the impression he was really close to Marcia. Of course, she died when she was 27. Need something? But during the trial, Barrett got on the stand, and he was being represented by Larry Petit. And Petit explained to the judge that that Dr. Barrett was not in good condition. He had some heart problems, and needed to go easy, and this and that and the other. The judge said, fine, and what was the judge's name? The one that was so good for plaintiffs?
Whitaker.
Whitaker. Whitaker was the judge. And Whitaker said, Dr. Barrett, anytime you're feeling bad or anything like that, Just let us know. Don't want anything to happen to you. And so I piped up, and I just had heart bypass surgery a year and a half ago, and I carried nitroglycerin around with me just to make me feel safe. And so I said, well, Dr. Barrett, do you have any nitroglycerin with you? And he said, no, I don't. And I said, well, I have some. Do you want to have it with you just in case you feel like you need it while you're testifying? And he said, I sure would. And so I'm doling out nitroglycerin to a doctor. And Whitaker really got a kick out of it. I guess everybody did. But do you know Dr. Barrett?
Mm-hmm.
Just a real nice guy. Just
He's from Spring Hill.
Is he?
Mm-hmm.
Just as nice a guy as there was. But that was kind of a funny story. But
Is there anything that I hadn't asked you about that you want me to ask you about?
That's a dangerous question. No. I've I did the right thing being a lawyer. I've wasted a lot of time on politics and so forth. That going to the legislature, that's kind of like going back to college.
What accomplishment gave you the most satisfaction as being a lawyer?
Well, we sold Irving Place in 2002. And I had every file that I'd ever had. I'd stripped some of them down, but I had every file that I'd ever had. So I stacked them all out on the back porch. It was a stack of files. It would have at least taken up between that door, that cabinet like thing over there, almost out to the end of those curtains. And I went through all those files. I had to go, there could have been a will, there could have been something in there. So I relived my entire practice. And in a way, it made you feel real good about a lot of the cases, about a lot of the things you've done for people. And nothing in particular stood out. Like trying cases for Marcia Pendleton's daughter and husband was immensely satisfactory because of the relationship. And then there were a lot of cases where I knew I'd gotten people money and they'd blown it all, just like that. It didn't particularly, that kind of thing kind of was discouraging to me. Mm-hmm. So, but it doesn't anything really stand out. Actually, taking that case to the Supreme Court was an interesting odyssey. And we hadn't mentioned the fact that in 1981 a consent decree was filed here. It was negotiated right after Reagan got elected president. And it was his Justice Department and the Caddo Parish School Board. And I had been, from my work at First Methodist Church, we had a program down there for preschool children. And I got really interested in education. So there was a certain time to file objections. And I filed an objection to the consent decree. And Judge Stagg was going to hear those. And I got a call from Judge Stagg one day. And he essentially told me that I was wasting my time making an objection. And so I called George Strickler. who'd handled a whole lot
That
of
was the wrong thing to tell you. I know you too well.
Yeah. So George said, well,
You might tell everybody who George Strickler is.
he's a professor of law at Tulane who, during the 60s, worked with the civil rights movement that was going on in Mississippi when those 3 young men were killed over in Philadelphia, Mississippi. He told me about preparing applications to the federal court, sitting with a typewriter on his knee in a shack that was lived in by black people, and the experiences they had over there and the threats that were made against them. So I called up George, who knew all about it, and he said, well, you're right. As an objector, once he turns them down, you don't have any right to appeal, nothing. He said, all you can do is move to intervene on behalf of the black class, which is what I did. Well, here we go. And I ended up in the 5th Circuit, and I lost 2-1. On initial vote, it was en banc. And by the way, Fred Sutherland, who you know, was of course defending it.
Mm-hmm.
He was so mad at me, I believe he could have chewed that, whatever that is. It looks like a salt shaker. And I had been with the firm when they represented the Caddo Parish School Board.
Mm-hmm.
But when I left in '79, I had never represented the school board. I didn't know anything that had gone on since '79, had no relationship with it. And besides that, I didn't care. I was going on. So we argued it en banc. Have you ever argued en banc? That's an interesting experience. That's another thing I did. The rules of the court at that time said en banc that the lawyer had an initial period of 10 minutes to talk before anybody could ask him a question. So I hadn't been talking but a couple of minutes when somebody asked me a question. And I turned to whoever was presiding and to the judge, and I said, I thought under the rules I was supposed to be able to argue for 10 minutes without an interruption. And the judge said, that's correct, Judge so-and-so, we've got to give him 10 minutes to argue. Go ahead, Mr. Bain. I don't know if that was wise or not. But in any event, I won the first vote en banc 8-7. If you go back and look at the 5th Circuit's opinion en banc, and you read the dissent, it's Phillips versus the Caddo Parish School Board. No, it didn't. Not Phillips. I was representing June Phillips. Jones, E. Edward Jones versus the Caddo Parish School Board. When you read the dissent by Judge Rubin, you would swear that it's a majority opinion. It is exactly like a majority opinion, except at the end it said, for the reasons stated above, I respectfully dissent. Well, later I found out that started out as a majority opinion, but somebody flipped somebody. So that was the end of my career in that thing. I spent hours on that. And even after that, though, I worked with the Justice Department lawyer, who was a black lawyer in the Justice Department, and he had not negotiated the consent decree, and he didn't look real favorably on it. And he made them include me in a lot of the negotiations that went on. But nothing ever came out of it. I've been so frustrated with the Caddo Parish School Board's inability to help the failing schools that it just drives me crazy. But I will say this: it is a tough nut to crack, and I know it. But in any event,
I'm optimistic about Gorey, and I'm optimistic about the new school board. I think it's a step in the right direction. I praise Dr. Roseman and John Crawford. I mean Ed Crawford and all those people, yourself,
Well, I didn't start it. It got
Yeah,
started.
I know
while-
it was started by Roseman and Ed Crawford, and Bobby Jelks was a part of it too. So,
Yeah. Well, I contributed significantly. As a matter of fact, I contributed the max for one person in the runoff for Locke and Casey Hirschberg, is her name. And I was worried about, especially about Casey's thing. All came out fine.
yeah.
And they're going to be getting emails from me.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for the interview.
All right.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.